My name is Claire Bennett. That day was my younger brother's wedding. Held in a ballroom filled with golden lights, lavish gowns, and elegant laughter. As guests raised their glasses in celebration, my father suddenly took the microphone and spoke each word with chilling clarity. This family has never needed mistakes, especially the one named Claire. No one objected. My mother smiled. My brother bowed his head, never once looking in my direction. I stood there, surrounded by over 100 people, and felt as though I had vanished from the world. Have you ever been erased by your own family, like you never even existed? But if this story touches something deep within you, please leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so I can tell you what happened after that day, because beyond the pain came a reckoning. When I was little, Grandma Eleanor was the only one in the family who ever called me gentle names, her little light or daughter of language. In her old kitchen, where sunlight filtered through white curtains, she taught me how to pronounce every word in the first book I ever read. We read Emily Dickinson poems, wrote letters to each other, even though we only lived a few houses apart. She wasn't wealthy, not in dollars, but she was rich in gentleness, encouragement, and the kind of faith she placed in me, something I never found again in anyone else in our family. I remember clearly the night she passed. The house was silent. No one cried, no one spoke beyond a few tired sighs. My father was still on the phone when the medical team arrived to confirm the time of death. I sat under the staircase, knees pulled to my chest, not because I didn't grieve, but because I was afraid I'd be scolded for showing too much emotion. My mother said, "Don't overreact, Claire, she was old." But to me, the world had just lost the only person who ever said my name with tenderness. Just a week after the funeral, her house was emptied. Everything tied to my memories vanished like it had never existed. No one asked my opinion, and I wasn't allowed to speak of her at family dinners. That's when things began to shift. Family gatherings became fewer, birthday messages faded into silence, and I slowly started to realize that my existence in the Bennett family had never been something they took for granted. I used to think maybe I was too sensitive, maybe they were just grieving or busy, but the truth became clearer, especially after I found out that my father had used Grandma's name to withdraw money from the trust she had established for community programs. While she was alive, she once told me about a small fund she'd set up. Not huge, but enough to support local libraries and free creative writing classes for underprivileged kids. She called it the Eleanor Fund, a place where words could heal. But when I asked my mother about the fund's status after Grandma passed, she brushed it off. "Your dad's handling it. Don't get involved in adult matters." Something in me knew better. I applied for a short internship at the fund's office, claiming I wanted to learn more about nonprofit work. That's where I came across some unusual statements, large withdrawals, and the person signing off on them was my father. I asked him directly one weekend at dinner. His response was just 2 words: "Be quiet." My mother shot me a look like I had done something disgraceful, and Ryan, my brother, quietly changed the subject like nothing had happened. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of the money, but because of the disorientation. I couldn't understand why trying to protect Grandma's legacy was treated like a crime, why speaking up turned me into the traitor of the family. From that day on, I was no longer invited to family events. That year's Christmas card didn't have my name. My mother's birthday party was held in secret. I only found out through a Facebook photo that included everyone but me. One time, I asked Ryan if he remembered when I saved him from a bike accident when he was 10. He shrugged and said, "Not really." That's when I realized some memories we treasure like gold, but to others, they mean nothing. I still tried. I sent gifts during the holidays, I called to check in, but I was always met with coldness or silence. I even handwrote a letter to my mother saying I missed her and didn't understand why I was being pushed away. The letter was returned unopened. For a long time, I questioned myself. Did I push too hard? Say something that cut too deep? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized. The only difference between us was that I refused to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing, and that alone made me intolerable in their eyes. I once hoped, naively, that one day they would look back, understand, maybe even remember what I had done for this family. But what I've learned painfully is this. Some people don't need your understanding. They don't need your forgiveness because they never believed they did anything wrong. I still have the first letter Grandma Eleanor wrote to me when I was 10. In it, there's a line I'll never forget. If one day you find yourself standing alone, don't be afraid. Maybe it's because your light is too different from the darkness around you. And I believe she never wrote anything just to soothe me. I can't pinpoint exactly when the exclusion began. All I know is that it didn't arrive with a bang. It came in long silences, in moments where no one said my name, like I had never been there. That holiday season, I sent my mom an email asking if she needed me to bring dessert like I did every year. No response. A week later, I saw a photo of the whole family gathered around the dinner table, my parents, Ryan, and even the cousins from Georgia, under a handmade sign that said, "Home is where the love is." I wasn't there. The seat I used to take was now an empty chair with a breadbasket on top. I didn't get angry. I just stared at the picture for a long time, closed the screen, and washed the dishes, like I'd never seen it. That year's Christmas card was mailed to friends, coworkers, even to the neighbor who once borrowed my hammer 3 years ago. In the photo, the Bennetts posed in front of the fireplace, all dressed in coordinated red, smiling perfectly. I used to be in that photo, before Ryan got engaged, before Mom stopped reminding me to bring Grandma's gingerbread recipe. But this year, something was off. When I looked closer, I realized the photo was old, but the left side, where I used to stand, had been cleanly cropped and replaced with a decorative pine branch. The hand-kit sweater I remembered wearing had been erased under an artificial light flare. I didn't call, didn't message to ask. I just sat down and wrote a single line in my notebook. It's not that they forgot me, they made sure to erase me. I don't even know when I was removed from the family group chat. I only found out Ryan was engaged after a close friend sent me a photo from a party in Charleston. I called to congratulate him. He picked up, his voice curt, like I had interrupted his dinner. "That was a while ago," he said. "We thought you knew." Then he hung up before I could say anything else. One time, I ran into one of my old teachers at a local bookstore. She remembered me warmly, smiled, and asked, "You're still in Europe, right? Your mom said you were teaching in France." I froze. My mother, the same woman who once told me not to let anyone know I worked at a financial abuse nonprofit, had created another version of my life, one that was easier to tell, easier to swallow, easier to dismiss. They didn't want to admit that I lived only a few hours away, that I came into the city on weekends, that I still shopped at the farmer's market near Ryan's old school. They needed me to be the one who left, who disconnected, who chose not to be part of the family so they wouldn't have to take responsibility for my absence. Sometimes when you're erased, your silence becomes the excuse people use to rewrite the truth. Old acquaintances started avoiding me at the grocery store. People who once borrowed my books now walked faster when they saw me. One of Mom's old friends saw me at a cafe, quietly pulled out her phone like she had urgent business to tend to. I didn't resent them. In a small town like mine, people don't choose truth, they choose comfort. And my existence had become far too inconvenient to acknowledge. Even at the nonprofit where I worked, where I once thought I had found community, there were still people who asked, "Didn't we see you at the Bennett family tribute last year? They were honored for their contributions to public education, weren't they?" I gave a soft smile and said, maybe I just didn't fit the image they were going for. Then I turned away before the tears could rise. I used to think that if I was kind enough, patient enough, quiet enough, things would eventually change. But the more I stayed silent, the further I was pushed away. The exclusion didn't just happen on the surface, it crept into habits, into relationships, into the stories people told about me, ones I was no longer allowed to be part of. I kept everything. The invitations with my name cut out, the emails declining my visits, the old photos that had been edited, not because I hadn't let go, but because I needed proof that I once existed, that I had once been a part of them. However briefly, however much they tried to erase it, I had been a part. And no one, not even the people who created me, had the right to deny that. The night Ryan's wedding ended, I returned to my small apartment in Portland, kicked off the heels that had left blisters on my feet, and collapsed onto the floor like someone who had just stepped off a battlefield. No goodbyes, no kind glances from anyone in the family. But what kept me up all night wasn't my father's words or my mother's refusal to meet my eyes. It was something that rose up from deep inside me, a realization that I had lost more than I thought. On 2 a.m., I opened the old box Grandma Eleanor had left me. Inside were handwritten letters, a few faded photographs, and a small burgundy leather folder I had never looked at closely. I flipped through page by page, reading each word, and then I stopped. The first page was a photocopy of a deed transfer for the family's summer cabin in Vermont, the place we used to visit every year, the place where Grandma and I once painted the porch cream white, where I woke up to the scent of pine and the sound of sparrows. On the document, the seller was listed as Claire Bennett. The signature below clearly bore my name, but I had never signed anything related to that property, never agreed to sell, never even been asked. I held the document up to the light and examined the handwriting. The C in Claire wasn't curved the way I always wrote it. The last name Bennett was smudged, like someone's hand had trembled while signing. I didn't need a handwriting expert. I could feel the forgery in my gut. It wasn't my signature. It was someone trying to imitate me without knowing me at all. Someone who didn't realize I never signed fast, that I always pressed each stroke with intention, as if every letter carried a piece of my dignity. I found a lease agreement I had signed when I was 28, back when I lived in Seattle. I placed the two documents side by side. The difference was undeniable. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the raw, unfiltered sense of betrayal. My own family, the people who gave me life, had forged my name to steal the last thing that still held a piece of my shared memory with Grandma Eleanor. I placed my hand on the fake deed and stared at the final line. Transaction completed under the authorization of Notary Public Linda S. Marsh. I recognized the name. Linda had been my mother's close friend, someone who attended our family gatherings, always smirking, always giving me that look, like I was a bit outdated, a little out of place. I got up, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out an old stack of documents I'd kept from my time working at the nonprofit. I needed evidence, not just for myself, but for anyone who might claim I was imagining things or overreacting. I found 3 of my verified signatures, all notarized, all date-stamped. Placing them next to the forgery, the contrast was crystal clear. But what tightened my chest wasn't just the fake signature, it was the fact that they did all of this behind my back, then still invited me to the wedding like nothing had happened. They looked me in the eye, raised glasses, smiled for photos, and walked away without an ounce of shame or remorse. Maybe to them I was no longer someone capable of fighting back, just a name to be crossed out, no explanation required. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, still clutching the forged document. My mind was full of images of that Vermont cabin, the lavender patch Grandma once planted, the green hammock we used to take turns swinging in on summer afternoons. It wasn't about the money. What I couldn't accept was that they sold away those memories, that they stole my name to erase the last safe place I had ever known. The rain began to fall, soft, steady taps on the window glass. I wrapped myself in a thin blanket, holding the papers close like a goodbye letter. I didn't yet know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure. They no longer had the right to speak for me, no more deciding what I was allowed to keep, and certainly no right to use my name for anything I never consented to. I don't remember exactly why I drove to Vermont that day. All I know is that by the time the afternoon sun cast shadows through the windshield, I had driven for over 4 hours from Portland without stopping. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe something deep inside me still needed to find what hadn't yet been erased. The old wooden house where Grandma Eleanor used to live no longer belonged to our family. After she passed, my mother called me exactly once, to inform me the house had been sold. Quick, clean, no time for questions. The house had since been repainted a pale beige. The lavender garden was down to just a few scraggly plants near the fence. I stepped out of the car, took a deep breath, and knocked. A middle-aged woman opened the door. Her eyes were cautious at first, but softened when I told her my name. Claire? Eleanor's granddaughter? Her voice had that familiar Northeast drawl. Then she opened the door wider. Give me a minute. A few minutes later, she returned with a small wooden box covered in a thin layer of dust and gently placed it in my hands. We found this in a cabinet under the stairs. Not sure if she meant to leave it behind, but your name is written right on the lid. My husband was going to throw it out during renovations, but I had a feeling we should keep it. I couldn't say a word. I just nodded, my throat tight. My hands trembled as I took the box. I sat in my car for a long time before I had the courage to open it. The scent of old wood, damp paper, and something faintly floral, like the powder Grandma used, rose up. Inside were a few photos, a soft leather journal, and an unsealed envelope labeled in her familiar hand. For Claire, when you're old enough to understand. My fingers cooled against the ink. My eyes blurred as I unfolded the letter. My dearest Claire, I'm writing this on a fall morning while the kitchen window rattles from the breeze. You're at school, and I'm missing your voice reading poems out loud in the living room last night. Maybe this letter will never reach you, or maybe, by the time you read it, I'll no longer be here. But if it's in your hands now, then that means some part of my heart was right. That you still need to know the truth. I revised the will, not because I don't love the others, but because I believe inheritance shouldn't reward pretense. You are the only one who never wore a mask. You've lived truthfully, even when it made others uncomfortable, even when it cost you your place. I've seen that in your eyes since you were little. And I want what's mine to be held by someone who knows the value of things, not just their price. The house in Vermont, the Eleanor Fund, and my unpublished works, all of it I leave to you, because you never used your voice to harm, only to speak the truth. Because you're different from the rest, and that's the most beautiful thing of all. I'm sorry if this causes you trouble, but trust me, Claire. Those who live behind masks never hold on to anything for long. But you, the one who chooses truth, you'll never lose what truly belongs to you. I read the letter over and over until I couldn't tell where the ink ended and the tears began. Every word from her felt like a blade cutting through the thick skin I had built up over the years. She had seen me, understood me, believed in me. While the rest of the family turned their backs, she, even in her final silence, chose to stand with me. I sat there until darkness swallowed the road outside the house. The wooden box rested in my lap like quiet proof that I hadn't imagined it all, that I had once belonged to this family, had once held a place, been trusted without condition. But what made my throat tighten wasn't the letter's content. It was the final line at the bottom of the page. If they do anything that breaks your heart, remember, I saw it all. Not I believe you, but I saw. She had seen it all, and still chose to give me the key, not out of pity, but out of truth. I left Vermont the next morning, when dew still blanketed the windshield and the trees along the road hadn't yet stirred in the breeze. The wooden box sat in the passenger seat, wrapped carefully in an old coat. I didn't turn on the radio or set the GPS. I let silence guide me. My mind wasn't full of shame or fear anymore. It was a low, steady wave, not loud, but unwavering. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in this fight. She had seen everything, and now I needed to make others see it too. Tasha Green was the only person I thought of when I needed to begin. We studied law together, but our paths had diverged sharply. I went into nonprofit work, she chose the corporate arena and became wildly successful. But what I always knew about Tasha was this: she never let injustice go unanswered, even when the people responsible were your own parents. Our first meeting was in her downtown Portland office. Tasha looked at me from behind her desk, eyes full of concern and caution. "Claire," she said gently, "I need the whole thing, from start to finish. Don't leave anything out, not even the smallest part." I nodded, opened the file box, and laid Grandma Eleanor's letter on the table. Then, piece by piece, I told her everything, every fragment, every detail. By the time I stopped, my voice was hoarse. Tasha didn't speak for a few minutes. Then she picked up her phone, dialed, and said calmly, "I need the signature forgery team. Urgently." For the next 2 weeks, Tasha and I moved like shadows between bank offices, record storage firms, and notary agencies in northern Massachusetts. I learned to stay calm while requesting footage from last year's transactions, learned to listen for the pause in a fund manager's voice, and learned how to hide the shaking after each new discovery. The first statement revealed that the Vermont home had been sold through a transfer company called Fireside Properties, a name I didn't recognize, but their legal representative was someone very familiar, Linda Marsh. I wasn't surprised, but Tasha clenched her jaw. Then came the bank trail. A wire transfer totaling $820,000, the exact listing price of the home, had gone from Fireside into an account under the name Marlene E. Bennett. My mother, the same woman who once stood before me and said, "You think you know anything? Stay out of what doesn't concern you." Tasha held the statement up, her hand steady but her voice slowed. "Claire, this was an internal transfer, not an investment, not an authorized payout, a one-time direct deposit, and the sale contract clearly states no ownership disputes." I closed my eyes. My chest tightened like I'd swallowed ice. We kept digging. The notarized transfer documents had handwriting that looked nothing like the 3 verified signature samples of mine that Tasha had submitted. The handwriting analysis came back 3 days later, completely inconsistent, not written by the same person. I held the report, unsure whether I felt pain or relief. It felt like finding the first piece of net in a sea of muddy water. But what broke me wasn't the fake signature. It was the email Tasha recovered from an old archive folder on Linda Marsh's account. Linda, my mother's longtime friend. In it, my mother sent a thank you note after the transaction was completed, along with a casual line, "Keep it clean. Claire doesn't need to know. She never had any use for that house anyway." The words were so neat, so casual, like a grocery list, as if I were an old towel, easier to toss than to explain. Tasha looked at me. "How far do you want to go?" I didn't answer right away. I just opened the wooden box I always kept close, pulled out a copy of Grandma's letter, placed it beside the bank statement, and whispered, "All the way, but quietly. No one can know when I'm coming." She nodded, and from that day on, every move we made was as discreet as breath. Tasha contacted the state notary's office, requested the name of the original file submitter. I started listing other assets that may have been quietly reassigned, comparing dates and signatures. Sometimes I fell asleep at the table, red pens still in hand. Some nights I dreamed of Grandma Eleanor sitting beside me, reading letters by the kitchen light, saying nothing, just looking at me the way she always did. Silent, but solid. I knew we had a long way to go, but every document I turned, every line I underlined, wasn't just work anymore. It was how I reclaimed my voice. One last time, and this time, no one would silence me halfway through. I wrapped the box in black silk and placed it inside an old leather handbag I'd once carried to court as a fresh law intern. Not because the bag was valuable, but because I remembered exactly how it felt back then, walking into court for the first time with hope, with ideals, with a young belief that justice was clean-cut and black and white. But now I knew. Justice doesn't always come in verdicts. Sometimes it comes from the persistence to hold on to the truth, even when no one wants to hear it. The box I'd prepared wasn't large, just big enough to hold what mattered most. A notarized copy of Grandma Eleanor's original will, 3 documents proving my signature had been forged, a printed email thread between my father and his private attorney, where they discussed restructuring the estate to eliminate what they called a PR risk. And finally, an 8-minute audio recording pulled from a donor gala prep meeting last fall. In the recording, my mother's voice rang out clearly. "Claire doesn't fit the image we're building. She's too muted, not engaging. Let Caleb or Ryan be the media face. Don't let her appear in any photos." Then came my father's soft chuckle, sliding in behind her. As long as she doesn't dig through the old files, it's fine. No one listens to her anyway. Tasha listened to the audio one last time before sealing the box. She didn't comment, just sighed, then pulled out a business card with a handwritten address. Judge Deborah Sinclair's office. The same judge who'd handled estate disputes in D.C. No email, Tasha said. We do it the old way, so they don't get the chance to wipe anything before it's seen. That morning, the sky was heavy with low-hanging clouds. I parked 3 blocks from the courthouse and walked through the central square. Strangers passed me on the sidewalk. No one knew what I was carrying, what lived beneath my coat, but I did. I walked without hurry, without shaking, like I was returning something to its rightful owner. Not out of vengeance, not to make a scene, just because it needed to be done. The clerk at the courthouse received the box, glanced at my name on the sealed envelope, and asked, "Do you have an appointment?" I shook my head. No. But what's inside is something the judge needs to see today. My voice wasn't loud, wasn't shaky, but it was firm. The clerk hesitated a moment, then nodded. I'll make sure it's delivered this morning. When I left the courthouse, I paused for a few minutes at the top of the stone steps, letting the wind run through my hair, carrying with it the damp scent of a day without rain, but soil still cold. I wasn't expecting a reaction. I wasn't thinking about outcomes. I just felt a little lighter, like a part of the weight inside me had finally been seen by someone, even if they hadn't said a word. That night, I couldn't fall asleep right away. I sat at the kitchen table and replayed the recording, listening to their voices talk about me like I was nothing but a variable they couldn't control. Each sentence, each flat chuckle hit my chest like a slow drum beat. I didn't cry. The tears had long since dried up. What replaced them was a thick, settled silence. Not one of surrender, but of someone stepping back to prepare for the next step forward. I carefully saved copies of everything onto a separate hard drive, then locked it away with Grandma's letter in a small safe tucked in the corner of my closet. Each time I turned the lock, the sound of the latch closing felt like affirmation. I'd done the right thing. Not for revenge, not to threaten anyone, but to put the truth back where it belonged, just as she once taught me. Tasha texted at dawn. They received the box. The judge has started the review. I didn't respond. I simply set the phone down, looked out the window, where morning hadn't yet broken, and thought to myself, finally, my voice is no longer being pushed aside. The message came at 5 a.m., no subject line, no signature, just a link to the homepage of an investigative news outlet that specializes in nonprofit transparency. Underneath a faint background image was the bold headline, "Behind the Perfect Family. Image lies a hidden will, illicit property transfers, and a daughter erased from all records." I sat up, heart pounding as if someone had knocked on my door in the middle of the night. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled down to the opening lines. The article didn't mention my name directly, but the details were unmistakable for anyone who knew. They listed forged signature evidence, recounted the contents of the recorded conversation between my parents and their in-house attorney, and clearly described the unannounced transfer of the Vermont house away from a co-owner. There was even a quote, "We need a unified media image. Claire doesn't fit. She always looks off-brand." My mother's words were bolded, followed by her full name, Marlene E. Bennett, along with her former title at the Eleanor Foundation. I didn't know who had leaked the information. It could have been someone in the clerk's office, or maybe a third party who stumbled across the records during processing. I didn't want to know. What I did feel, very clearly, was an unfamiliar stillness inside. Not relief, more like that quiet moment after hearing the confession of someone who's lied to you for years. When there's nothing left to doubt, and no need to ask why anymore. By late morning, the news had spread. Larger outlets began referencing the original article. The comments section filled with words like hypocrites, picture perfect family with a hollow core, and cutting a biological daughter out of a will for not fitting the brand. The The more I read, the more I saw the public's anger and my own inner emptiness. Someone even pulled up the Christmas photo from that year and compared it to an older one from a decade earlier, pointing out the unnatural crop beside my mother. They realized the missing figure was me. For the first time, I was recognized by my absence. That afternoon, Ryan canceled all his meetings. An internal contact forwarded Tasha an email from Ryan's latest business partner, officially suspending contract talks due to unresolved reputational concerns and potential legal complications. On the same day, the magazine feature on Ryan and Lena's wedding was quietly removed without explanation. I imagined the scene inside my parents' kitchen by then. My mother gripping her phone, voice rising with every word, my father staring blankly out the window, and Ryan asking the same question again. Why did she do this? But the truth is, I hadn't done anything except let their voices be heard. They had said those things, they had chosen those words, they had signed those documents. I just didn't let them bury it like they always did. That evening, my mother released a brief statement posted to the organization's website. Our family is going through a period of internal misunderstanding and respectfully requests privacy as we work through it. A sentence I'd seen 100 times before, cold, polished, and completely devoid of remorse. Not surprising. To my mother, image always mattered more than accountability. To my father, silence was strategy. And to Ryan, as long as his position wasn't threatened, he wouldn't ask too many questions. The story continued to spread the following day. A national radio segment quoted my mother's voice from the recording and launched a panel discussion titled, "When Families Use PR to Filter Their Children." I sat at a local cafe, sipping black coffee, listening to strangers analyze the words I once couldn't say aloud. The very truths I feared would be buried were now beginning to rise to the surface. Someone messaged me to ask how I felt watching my family be exposed like this. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because no word felt right. Not vindicated, not happy, not vengeful, just seen. The truth had stepped into the light, and I was no longer the only one carrying it. No longer the only one who saw what happened and had to pretend it hadn't. And that, while it didn't heal me, was a first step toward no longer staying silent. The courthouse sat on an old downtown street, where the maple trees were already turning gold even though it was only early September. I arrived nearly an hour early, not out of anxiety, but because I needed a moment to gather myself. I wore a simple suit, nothing flashy, nothing meek. I wanted to stand there as myself, nothing more, nothing less. Tasha arrived later, holding the file folder with official stamps. She gave me a small nod, no words. We both knew there was nothing left to say. Every piece of evidence was ready. Every silence from the past had been replaced by truth, with names, dates, and signatures, some real, some forged. The courtroom was small, without the grandiosity of television dramas. Plain wooden benches, faded cream walls, and the low hum of a ceiling fan. But to me, this was the place where everything that had been stolen would finally be named. My family sat on the bench across from me, my mother, arms crossed, eyes cold, like she was in a board meeting. My father never lifted his gaze while I watched him. Ryan stared straight ahead, not at me, not at anyone, but I could see the fatigue etched into his temples, the kind of wear that comes from losing control and not knowing how to get it back. When the judge entered, everyone stood. I heard the old wooden floor creak beneath my shoes as if time had slowed. My name was called. Tasha stood and spoke firmly but clearly. "Your Honor, we present the original will authored by Eleanor Bennett, notarized before any later amendments. Included are verified documents proving signature forgery, bank statements showing undisclosed asset transfers, and a video recorded by the decedent herself." All eyes turned to the screen as Tasha hit play. The light flickered, the frame slightly shaky. Grandma Eleanor sat in her familiar living room, wearing the soft blue sweater I gave her on my 25th birthday. Her voice came through, raspy but clear. "If one day Claire has to stand alone, I hope she'll know I chose her, not out of blood, but out of conscience. Claire's the last light in my bloodline. I didn't look back at my family. I kept my eyes on the screen, my hands resting gently on my knees to keep them from shaking. There was something in her words that made the whole room fall silent, as if even those who had never met her could sense she wasn't speaking to please anyone. Tasha continued. The handwriting analysis report was presented, comparing every pen stroke, every mismatch detail. Then the transfer record from Fireside Properties to an account under the name Marlene Bennett, just days after Eleanor's passing. And finally, the recovered email where my mother wrote, "Get it done before she comes back asking." I could hear my mother bite her lip. The chair beside her creaked slightly as my father shifted. Ryan kept his empty stare. Judge Sinclair, a woman in her early 60s with piercing, unreadable eyes, flipped through every page in silence. When she looked up, no one dared to breathe. Her voice was firm, not a hint of hesitation. The court affirms the legal validity of the original will. All subsequent amendments are void due to lack of beneficiary consent and evidence of fraud. Claire Bennett is the rightful heir in accordance with the testator's intent. All transferred assets shall be restored. The unauthorized transfer and administrative violations will be referred to the Federal Tax Investigation Unit. No one spoke. No one objected. Ryan lowered his head. My father stayed silent. My mother stood, but didn't move. She stood there, as if trying to understand how things had come to this. After all her careful planning, all her silence, all her buried tracks. But what she didn't know was this: truth doesn't need to be shouted to survive. It only needs to be seen. Once, to change everything. I remained seated. I didn't clap, I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I just looked up at the ceiling where the fluorescent light flickered gently like the period at the end of a sentence. Everything had finally been put back in its rightful place. Not by luck, but by patience, and by a quiet resolve never to let my voice be buried again. I returned to the house in Vermont on a late afternoon in early winter, when the wind was cold enough to hush the trees, but not cold enough to close the heart. The old wooden steps, once chipped, had been replaced with white oak. The porch had been reinforced, and the once worn windows now opened to a warm space filled with the scent of herbal tea and the soft clicks of firewood in the hearth. I stood at the door for a long time before unlocking it. Not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to remember the moment with all my senses. A house once sold with a forged signature was now back where it belonged. There was no big sign, no ribbon cutting, no speeches. I simply placed a small wooden plaque beneath the lavender bush that had grown back after years of neglect. The engraved words were simple: Eleanor House, where untold things find their voice. I used most of the inheritance to renovate the house into a writing and art center for women who had experienced betrayal within their own families. No degrees required, no resumes, no need to prove pain. Just one requirement: they had something they had never been able to say. The room that used to be mine became a small library. Eleanor's kitchen stayed the same, except for a few added hooks for ceramic mugs and a shelf for cookbooks with handwritten notes in many different scripts. Every corner of the house held a piece of memory, not to trap the past, but to let it be told in gentle light. The first week, 3 women arrived: one who dropped out of school after becoming pregnant at 17, one whose brother took guardianship of their mother when she fell ill, and one who lost all contact with her family after coming out as trans. They didn't speak much the first day. They sat in the library, turning notebook pages slowly, eyes quietly scanning the room like they were asking whether this place was truly safe to breathe. I didn't ask anything. I just made tea, brought it out 1 cup at a time, then returned to tidying the small yard out back. On the 4th day, they began to write. One morning I woke earlier than usual. It was still dark, but I saw a faint light glowing from the writing room. I walked closer, peered through the crack in the door, and saw the oldest woman writing on parchment, her eyes full of tears, but her hand never stopping. I quietly stepped away and left a folded napkin outside the door with a handwritten note. Keep writing. No one here will ask you to forgive. Just tell it so that you can finally hear it for yourself. I haven't gone back to the old house in Connecticut. I'm not waiting for a call or an apology. After the trial, my mother said nothing. My father left no message. Ryan sent a brief text, "You won." I didn't reply, because this wasn't a game. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about naming the truth. About sitting down with yourself after years of being shut out from tables you once believed were yours. I kept Eleanor's old dining table. Even though its surface is scratched and the chair legs wobble, I placed it at the center of the house. Not to remember old meals, but so the women who come here can sit down, drink tea, write letters, share stories, or if they want, just sit in silence. I didn't rebuild the old table. I built a new one, where no one is excluded for not fitting the image. Sometimes, standing on the porch and looking out at the misty mountains, I remember the look in Grandma's eyes from the video that I was the last light in her bloodline. Not a light to shine for others, not to dazzle or lead, just a small warmth, enough that anyone lost might find their way back to themselves. And sometimes, that alone is more than enough. I don't know if this story reminds you of anything in your own life. Maybe you've been pushed away from a familiar table, been looked at like a burden, stayed silent because no one wanted to listen. But if you're here now, still listening to these words, then maybe, somewhere in you, there's a wound only you truly understand. What do you think about everything that happened to me? If it were you, would you choose to walk away quietly, or would you step into that courtroom and set things right? I genuinely want to know what you think. Leave your thoughts in the comments, not to seek agreement, but so stories like this no longer stay buried. And if you'd like to keep walking this journey with me, to hear more stories about family, about the bonds we think can never be mended, hit subscribe, because my journey doesn't end here. And maybe, just maybe, yours is ready to begin right here too.